leasehold housing stock. However, this is supposed to read members request the head of property to attend a future G&A committee to discuss the process of generating income with the council's portfolio of property that wasn't specific to housing. So that is it in terms of discussion on amendments from the minutes from July. I will propose that we accept these minutes. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Packman. Do members agree? Thank you very much. Okay, point of information. Chris Blundell has sent a email out about this, but members are asked to note that...
So you need to approve the minutes in full now, just proposal and seconder, because you've approved the amendments. But
okay, yeah, but apologies. Before we move on then, so that was for the amendments. I'll propose that we adopt the minutes themselves as well as the amendments. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Packman again. Are we agreed? Thank you. So yes, point of information, members are asked to note that items 13 and 14 have been removed from discussion from tonight's meeting, and we brought back to members at a date still to be arranged for an extraordinary meeting likely to be in January. So I'm sure you're all excitedly thinking of coming out in January for a cybersecurity specific G&A meeting. I certainly will be. But details and dates of that will be coming out. People are also asked to note that items 9 and 11 will be discussed after item 10, but actually I think that note isn't relevant now, so apologies. Agenda item 4, Treasury Management Strategy Statement, Minimum Revenue Provision Policy Statement, Annual Investment Strategy for 2024-25. Matt, would you like to speak on this?
Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? This report and annexes include the proposed Treasury Management Strategy Statement, Minimum Revenue Provision Policy Statement, Annual Investment Strategy, Capital Strategy and Non-Treasury Investments Report, the TMSS, for 24-25. Treasury management is the management of the Council's cash flows, its banking, money market and capital market transactions, the effective control of the risks associated with those activities and the pursuit of optimum performance consistent with those risks. Every year we invest and borrow money in order to manage the Council's fluctuating cash flow. These activities are undertaken in accordance with strict criteria that complies with statutory guidance and Council approved limits. This report is therefore important in that respect, as it provides the capital plans including prudential indicators, a minimum revenue provision or MRP policy that indicates how residual capital expenditure is charged to the revenue over time, the Treasury Management Strategy, which is how the investments and borrowings are to be organised, including Treasury indicators, and an investment strategy, the parameters on how investments are to be managed. Key reporting items to consider which have been included in the report are: capital expenditure of 134 million is forecast over the next 3 years for 24-25 to 26-27 inclusive, requiring borrowing of 34.5 million. There has been no change to the minimum revenue provision policy for paying off the accumulated borrowing requirement. It is recommended that the Governance Audit Committee notes and makes any comments on as appropriate to this report and annexes, including each of the key elements listed. These includes the capital plans, prudential indicators and limits for 24-25 to 26-27, including the authorised limit prudential indicator, the minimum revenue provision policy, the Treasury Management Strategy for 24-25 to 26-27, and the Treasury indicators. The investment strategy for 24-25 contained in the Treasury Management Strategy, including the detailed criteria, and the capital strategy for 24-25, and the non-Treasury investments report for 24-25. And finally, that this committee recommends this report and annexes, including each of the key elements listed in the report, to Council for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. We don't have anyone speaking under Council rules. Do we have any questions or comments from members? So this agenda item is down to note and to recommend to Council. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Donaldson and a seconder. Councillor Britcher, thank you very much. Are we agreed? Thank you very much, members. Okay, agenda item 5, mid-year review 23-24, Treasury Management and Annual Investment Strategy. Matt, can you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. Similarly to the report previously, this report summarises Treasury management activity and prudential and Treasury indicators for the first half of 23-24. The previous report and the introduction covered why and how we do what we do with regards to Treasury. This report covers where we are at the midpoint for 23-24 with regards to key indicators, and as a result the following represents the key reporting items to consider. For 23-24 mid-year, capital expenditure on long-term assets was 5.9 million, 22-23 mid-year 6.3 million, against a full-year budget of 60 million. This underspend, in case you was wondering, is mainly due to general fund projects that include housing assistance policy, office accommodation, Broadstairs flood and coast protection, Westbrook to St Mildred's Bay, that is. It also represents the additional allocation for HRA schemes in terms of acquisitions and new build programme, which was increased during the course of the year, and subsequently a large chunk, nearly 24 million of that variance is particular to the HRA. The Council's gross debt, also called the borrowing position at the 30th of September 2023, was 19.7 million. As at the 30th of September 22, it was 20 million, so as you can see, they're in line. The Council's underlying need to borrow to finance its capital expenditure, also called the capital financing requirement, is estimated to be 78.3 million at the 31st of March 24. As at the 31st of March 23, it was 52.2 million. That movement is predominantly due to the increase in HRA that I just mentioned. The Council has held less gross debt than its capital financing requirement and accordingly has complied with the requirement not to exceed its authorised borrowing limit of 81 million. As at the 30th of September 2023, the Council's investments balances were 55.4 million. As at the same time last year, it was 56.8. So as you can see, again, very similar. It is proposed that the 23-24 Treasury Management Strategy Statement be amended as described in Section 3 of the report. This being that both the operational boundary and authorised limit for borrowing in 23-24 Treasury Management Strategy, as referred to in Section 3.1 of the report, be increased by 20 million to reflect the increase in 23-24 HRA capital programme for the acquisition and development of new affordable housing units. And finally, and as previously, that this committee recommends this report and annexes, including each of the key elements listed in the report, to Council for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do any members have any comments or questions? Yep, Councillor Towner.
You know, all the borrowing that we're going through and going forward, I mean, what are the rates that we're currently paying for the borrowing throughout the next 2 years that you're negotiating currently?
It depends on the length of term of the borrowing, so we get preferential rates through the Public Works Loan Board, so whatever the market rates are, we effectively borrow at a slightly lower rate than that. It's 1.25, I think, below the market rate effectively for PWLB.
Yeah, Matt's correct. So we get a preferential rate, as local authorities typically can borrow at a lower interest rate than commercial enterprises. As Matt rightly said, again, it depends on the term. So for us at the moment, we can, if we were to borrow for up to 50 years, we get about 5%. So you'd have to lock in 5% for 50 years, given that we think interest rates are going to go down and in the sort of medium term at least. That's not something we'd be looking to do. But if you were looking to borrow for a year, we'd still be looking at getting 5.5%, which is just marginally above base rate at the moment, but better than you get out on the commercial markets.
Any other members have any comments or questions? So this is down for noting and then recommending to Council for approval. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please?
Sorry, Chair, do you mind?
Yeah, of course, Chris.
Just a little bit further detail on this. Just wanted to sort of explain that you and I met to answer some questions around just not necessarily these reports, but our treasury management strategy approach in general. Treasury management, I appreciate it's a very dry subject, but it is something that is important. It's one of the things that you'll see at local authorities when they've gone wrong. There's been another authority that's just gone into a Section 114 notice territory today, although that's not Treasury management related. It's Nottingham City Council, who had Robin Hood Energy, was one of the things that's been pinned on that. Other authorities have got themselves into a bind. A lot of it has been around bad investments. We are, I would say, and the strategy Matt presented earlier is a relatively low risk strategy. There's nothing I have to present to you as a committee, either in this report or the preceding report, that would be, I would say, raising any alarm bells. But these are the things that the committee should have in mind if they've got questions.
Thank you, Chris. And the purpose of the meeting was I wanted to understand the Council's debt position and the position of our reserves with reference to the risk register and how the Council would deal with risks emerging or impacting the council, and where we would have the cash reserves and the ability to respond to that. And I feel much more assured from having that time. All of the details were shared with me are in the report. I do have a question on this, and I was going to bring it up under the risk register as we're talking about it. Two of the risks that we're talking around are around limited resources for the council and the economic environment. Without going into the politics of it, how do you think the autumn statement may change sort of the medium-term projection for the council in terms of central government support, bearing in mind that the autumn statement includes quite large cuts to significant departments and has been accepted, I believe, by both political parties?
Yeah, good questions. The autumn statement doesn't give detail to local authorities, so we'll get the detail in the local government provisional finance settlement, which will come forward, be announced and published probably just before Christmas break. We're not expecting there to be any further significant allocations for local government over and above what's already been announced. There wasn't much in the autumn statement in terms of detail or further funding allocations. Much of that was set out in the previous spending review. I don't want to talk too much in terms of where other local authorities are. Clearly there's stuff in the press that you will have read, other commentators' opinions on the overall health of the sector. For Thanet, we're in a reasonably good place I'm in terms of our financial position at the moment. And although there wasn't any good news in the autumn statement in terms of additional funding, we still are on a relatively sure footing.
Thank you very much. Any more comments or questions from members? Nope. So as I said before, this is down for noting and recommending to council for approval. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Packman proposed and Councillor Donaldson seconded. Are members agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 6, contract standing order waivers. Chris, can you please provide us with your report?
Thank you, Chair. So this is, I believe, the fourth of such reports that have come to the committee previously. The purpose of this report ultimately is to provide a transparent picture of what is going on in terms of the council's procuring and purchasing activity, and in particular where there's been deviations from our standard practices. So you'll see in here reference to our contract standing orders. They're effectively our rules. It's a fancy way of saying the rules in terms of how we need to buy things at the authority. In certain instances, we will waive the rules, which means we don't follow exactly what's written down in the rules, but it's got to be for a good reason. There are certain instances where we can't waive those rules, and that would depend on the value of those contracts. So if you're into higher value contracts, and as you'll see on the table on the first page in the executive summary, if we're looking at the procurement of goods, supply or services, anything over £178,000, we have to follow the rules because that's set in legislation. Below that, they're what we refer to as our local rules, sort of good practice that we need to follow when we require our services to follow those rules in order to get best value for money in our purchasing activity. However, there are some instances where we deem it's best to deviate from those rules in order to get best value for the council. And that's the purpose of this report. So it sets out where we have deviated from those rules. So you'll see in the table again, just in the executive summary, there have been 12 instances between July to the beginning of November, 9th of November this year, where those rules weren't followed. The vast majority of them, as you can see, 11 of them, were for relatively low value contracts below that £100,000 threshold. So it's not as if we've deviated from rules that are set in statute. However, you can see in the same table there were a number of instances, 7 times, where we were presented with a case where officers wished to deviate from the rules, but as within the procurement and finance function and myself as a section 151 officer, I wasn't satisfied that they were in compliance with the reasons why we would usually allow those contracts to be varied, the route to contract to be varied from our standard form. So you can see it says that number of number of rejected waivers from July to November, there were 7. They're set out, along with the waivers and the reasons for the waivers, they're set out in Annex 4 to this report, within which, if you go right to the end, you'll see a number of rejected waivers. These were primarily related to consultancy, civils and structural consultancy advice that we were requiring in relation to procure in relation to the Levelling Up Fund down at the Ramsgate site. There have been a number of attempts to procure those contracts or that contract in a compliant manner. However, we weren't able to get any successful bidders. We didn't feel as a finance function and as officers that we could justify signing of the waivers, because we thought they could have continued to go back out to the market again. However, to do so would have put strain on the project delivery further downstream. So it was agreed that although they were deemed non-compliant with our procurement regs, it was still the best course of action for us to proceed with such non-compliant procurement activity, because that allowed us to deliver the projects in a timely fashion. In a similar vein, if you scoot up just a little bit further up on the 4th page of that annex, there was another rejected waiver, this one in relation to a marine toilet pod. There had been some market engagement between April and July to establish whether the preferred suppliers that they wanted to use. They'd run out of time in order to undertake a compliant route to market. However, our view was within procurement function and myself as Section 151 officer that it wasn't urgency because of unforeseen circumstances. It became urgent because they'd spent too much time at the pre-market engagement route. It wasn't unforeseen, so that therefore the waiver was not approved. However, it was considered still appropriate to go forward because the toilets needed to be purchased in time. If we'd said, no, you can't do that, you need to take a compliant route with our rules, that they would have effectively not been able to get the toilets in place in time for the summer season. So those, I would say, are the sort of the high-profile things within this report that are worth bringing to your attention. You can see that's just a handful across the long list of other waivers and the reasons for them that have been put forward, but I thought it was proper and appropriate for me to bring those ones to your attention. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chris. Do any members have any questions? Yes, Councillor Davis.
I think, as well as a question, I'd like to thank you, Chris, for again a thorough update, because part of a question that had arisen over this side was exactly about those cancelled acquisitions to do with the levelling up. I'm not going to try and get into long discussions about whether the status of those projects at this point, but I do think that it's in the, and thank you for your diligence on that, because there's rather a few blind alleys available. What I would like just to bring our attention to, and again, thank you for your reporting and transparency, is the item to Ramsgate Harbour Conservation Management Plan to support levelling up funded projects. It's an additional payment of $15,000 to the architects, whereby it's lately been confirmed that a conservation management plan is required. I can assure this chamber that there are many in that community, including community groups and so on, that have been yelling this for a long time. And it's the same old excuse, oh, we didn't know, and I'm not, no disrespect to anybody in this room, but somebody in these departments is blatantly ignoring what is obvious. There's recently been an overspend of more than $1 million on berths 4 and 5, and a lot of that's been put down to delays by getting the environmental impact assessment. We now have evidence of the Harbour Master in 2016 discussing the need for it. So there's a weak link in this chain somewhere, and it keeps coming back. And I think we need a more robust form of diligence. To that end, and I'm not trying to ambush a point, and my colleagues and I have got some points to make on a further item. However, I believe that there is a very real risk of this authority pedalling backwards to a situation we were in several years ago, whereby members were not involved sufficiently in the decision or the scrutiny process, and I think that's something that we need to note, but I don't want to steal my colleagues' thunder on issues they wish to raise. But again, thank you, Chris, because if we didn't have such accurate reporting, we wouldn't be able to find the questions. So.
Thank you. Councillor Davis, do you want to respond to the first point, Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Davis. I'm not sure if there was a question in there, but I'll try and talk to the point and try and give you some assurance around that. Within the procurement function and the finance service, when we are presented with issues like this, there is challenge there to understand whether such instances should have been foreseen or not, as you can see by the fact that waivers have been rejected when we don't think things were urgently. Sometimes they've just not been planned in the way that we would like them to do. And by highlighting this, well, I'm hoping this transparency improves performance and future contract management, so to say, or procurement management, because ultimately what we want to achieve through our purchasing activity is, wherever appropriate, to expose these contracts to competition, because through going through a competitive process where we're going out to buy supplies, services or goods and works, you can demonstrate you've got the best price for spending council taxpayers' money. If we have to deviate from that, it should be only exceptional circumstances. I think another objective for us should be, going forward, what I'd like to see is this report to be smaller, for waivers to become more of the exception rather than the rules. That's another thing I would be saying for members to be looking at and challenging, is actually the number, have they gone up or gone down? Because waivers really should be an exceptional tool that we use rather than business as usual. In terms of members' involvement and making sure we're not pedaling back from that and making sure members are involved in the decision-making process, we have you'll see most of these items are of relatively low value. I believe it went to, can't remember if it was Cabinet or Council, wasn't that long ago, the sort of key decision threshold. It might be coming to Council in a few weeks, in terms of the limits that we have, where any spending decision that is over £250,000, so £250,000, has to be approved by Cabinet. No officer can approve spending over that level. So in terms of making sure that members are involved in key decisions, strategic decisions, because that's what the role of members is in terms of the running of the organisation, and not getting too bogged down in operational detail, but making sure the organisation is going in the right direction and actually allocating those resources where they're supposed to be. Those thresholds are in place. Anything over £100,000 as well is something we've been discussing in our corporate management team. We're going to try and improve the transparency, so any expenditure over £100,000 that will be issuing officer decision notices, so that they're actually there as a record, that an officer's taken a decision to identify that we've spent money in that magnitude. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of assurance in terms of the direction we're trying to take the authority in improving the transparency of our financial reporting.
And thank you again for that. One thing that I'd like to clarify, if I could please, when you're talking about the thresholds for key decisions and so on, my understanding is that's a cumulative spend as well on a project. So for argument's sake, if a project were a bundle of smaller spends amounting to £1 million, it's the spend over the life of the project that dictates it as a key decision. Is that correct?
What we're really keen to do is avoid disaggregation. And actually this is one of the reasons why that waiver was rejected, because if you bundled them all up together, they would be above that threshold where we say statute is in place, and we didn't like the idea of disaggregating things to a lower level to sidestep rules. So when we're looking, it's sometimes it's a bit subjective, but when we're looking at those instances, what we're always trying to make sure is that things aren't being disaggregated and looking at things in isolation when really they're part of a larger project. And it should be, those decisions should be looked at in terms of discrete individual decision making rather than aggregating things up so they're not getting the right level of scrutiny.
Thanks for that, Chris, because it does lead to a point that'll be coming up, and it's about the distribution of government money under the 1.15 million, because that is being mooted to be done, and the lottery money, but we'll come to it when it comes to the item, but it's being mooted by officers with absolutely no member input, no member scrutiny or any knowledge of this, and they are engaged with the public and basically offering coffee that they can't deliver or should not be able to. And I'd like it recorded on every item that this level of scrutiny must be applied. We must have a member-led council, not officer-led decisions, and there's a danger of that. And as I say, no disrespect to yourselves, but it's an issue, and as I say, some evidence will be forthcoming. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I do want to sort of address that point, because you've used that word scrutiny a number of times, and one of the things I want to make sure that Governance and Audit does not become is a second scrutiny function. We have a scrutiny committee. Our function as Governance and Audit is to look at the processes of the council, make sure that the process is being followed, and then we have assurance around things like the risk register. I will say, just as a councillor elected in May like yourself coming in, and having previously served on KCC and been on Thanet District Council, I have found returning that scrutiny and the Governance and Audit process are very heightened, significantly from what I've seen in the past. I think a lot of hard work is being done by officers, and I'll give you one example. We've had a number of reports in the last year come to G&A with areas of limited or no assurance through audits, and I think a lot of hard work has been done by officers to identify that. Where this committee sort of flagged up concerns back in September, that was picked up by Cabinet, that was addressed by Chris at Cabinet, and greater focus is being given to those areas, because one of the challenges we have as a G&A committee coming in at the moment is pretty much the entire membership minus a couple of councillors is brand new, and some of the issues we're dealing with are very serious. I mean, we have an agenda item later covering some of these aspects, and it's almost like we are starting to address some large issues from the past that we are barely grappling and understanding at this stage. So we are going on a journey. I would hope that members, if you do have concerns about areas, can bring them to this committee and we can talk about them. That one thing I really want to be clear about, though, is we're not scrutiny. There is a very active scrutiny at the moment that has the opportunity to call in a lot of decisions, and we just need to get that balance right between the two. But I just wanted to address that comment. Do you want to say something, Chris?
Yeah, I just would probably echo the points you've made there, Chair, and I think it's important, perhaps, rather than getting too focused on the detail of particular individual waivers, but to really try and pick out themes. As I said, are the numbers going up? You know, are we now seeing waivers for high value contracts? Those are the types of things, those themes that as members should be trying to identify and ask questions there. But obviously our role as officers, and I'm very keen to be as transparent as something the council set out in terms of its corporate plan, is for us to improve the transparency in our reporting, and that's something that as officers we want to try and bring that to the council to allow councillors to ask those questions as well.
Chair, can I just come in as well? Just really to support everything that Chris has said, and obviously there is pre-decision, I mean, I'm not trying to confuse this with this committee with scrutiny, but obviously there is pre-decision scrutiny that has been introduced. And also just to say, to reiterate just the commitment, absolute commitment to transparency. One of the things that we have been discussing is looking at the decision-making processes. We're looking at the member officer protocol, and all of that hopefully will iron out some of the issues that you've raised and you've been concerned about going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. That's very comforting.
Definitely remiss of me not to welcome Ingrid to her first G&A meeting, so I'll take the opportunity. Welcome. Councillor Thanet, did you want to come in? Sorry.
Leading on from Councillor Davis and listening to what you said, Chris, is the breakdown of actually amounts that you talk about. £250,000 is a threshold that you have to then thereafter refer to the elected members' cabinet. What is it that could stop that happening? Is that you have a contract, it's worth £1 million, and the officers break it down to be in a way that they don't need to bring that forward and keep it below £250,000. What are the safeguards to ensure that that doesn't happen?
It's a good question. I would say we're reliant on the good officers within the legal services so the contracts need of a certain value. I think it's everything over £100,000. is reviewed by legal services. It will be going through my procurement team as well within Matt's service. So those are the types of things when we're looking at signing a contract to make sure things aren't disaggregated to avoid or evade that level of transparency. I think as well in terms of within the system, within our financial system, orders of a value over £100,000 have to be signed off by a director or a head of service, so you can't have officers at a junior level approving orders of a higher value. So I'm trying to think of any other controls. I mean, we're largely reliant, I would say, on the scrutiny of those within the procurement function and legal function. But is there anything else you want to add, Matt? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Only that from a monitoring perspective as well, before they can even go to contracts, we as a finance team individually have to sign off on the fact that the budget's available. So if I'm looking at a budget in the system for a contract where I know that the annual value of the contract is 250,000, I'd be challenging why all of a sudden the contract that was a 4-year contract is going through as a single year. So that disaggregation opportunity would be eliminated at that point in time. So you can't progress to the points that Chris has just raised without the sign-off on the budget in the first instance. So there's already a preliminary check before it's even got to that point.
Any other questions? Councillor Bright, I apologise.
It's okay. So as Councillor Scobie said, most of us are new. And I'm looking at this, and we said, is it getting better over time? Now, obviously, if I'm looking at this in the view that you've given us, going from 2021 onwards, we're obviously making really good progress here. But my question is really how much, 2021, 21, 22 were very odd years, right? So I'm assuming that TDC were making an awful lot of decisions that they had to make very quickly. They didn't have time to scrutinise them properly because the council was kind of almost barely functioning, due not just to governance issues, but due to COVID. What would it look like if we went back even further? I mean, what does good look like? Because obviously we've come down by over 100% year on year, but would that stand scrutiny if we compared it to, say, 2016, 2017?
Chris?
Excellent question, and I don't have the answer to that. Yeah, you're right. Obviously, pandemic was a peculiar time for us all, and public sector procurement was no different to that. We did make some changes to our local rules at that time. So as it says in the report, we have to get 3 quotes for anything over £10,000. During the pandemic, we increased that to 25,000, just because we needed to move at such pace, to procure things. Getting things done quickly was more important than demonstrating you've necessarily got the absolute best possible price during that time. Can look to actually to try and get some further data going back into those years to demonstrate the trends over that time. I think the only again difference in caveat I'll probably put on that, and while we obviously want to see the numbers going down, the spend profile of the authority has also changed recently. As we're talking about levelling up funds and the Margate Town deal and the size of the capital programme, we're spending more money and engaging in with more contracts, so that obviously presents more opportunities for waivers as well. So we'll do some work and try and make sure we've got some meaningful comparators for you over a lengthier period of time.
I think it would be a good idea, but obviously I do accept the fact that this is about improving going on rather than just looking back. But it would be good just to have an idea.
Thank you very much, members. I think that was quite an interesting discussion. The recommendation is that we note this report. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for noting, please? Councillor Britcher proposing. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Bright seconding. Are members agreed? Agreed. We have noted it. Okay, agenda item 7, we have Auditor's Annual Report. I have Chris down to speak, but I'm assuming this will be Nick Halliwell or somebody from Grant Thornton.
Yes, very much so. I will be passing over to my colleagues, but just by very short, brief form of introduction to report. So Sarah Imunger, Nick and Matt with us from Grant Thornton tonight, who will present their actual annual audit report. But you'll see in front of that's a covering report that hopefully sets out a little bit of context in terms of our position as officers, how we view this. Quite rightly, it's been well said before, so I won't go into the ins and outs of all. It was a very challenging period of time for the authority that this review covers in terms of the work that they've done for us on our position on value for money. I think if you were to, when you look at some of the reports at the traffic light RAG rating system, it can look still quite alarming if you look at just on surface level. But I think once you scratch below that and the detail within Sarah's report, you can see actually that progress has been made. In most notably since 22-23, very different to the environment we were operating in 2021 and 21-22. The covering report that myself and colleagues have produced does set out some of the progress that we've made since then. In terms of really pleased to say that we've got Ingrid with us now, who is the final member of our corporate management team to be appointed. So we've got a full complement of officers at that senior level now. There are rightly still some things we need to improve on and still need to work, and we are working on those. It's been spoken about before, improving the way that we communicate with members in terms of the provision of information that we're getting to you. I know that's really important to members, to councillors, and it's important to us too, and we're working really hard to try and get that right, as Ingrid referred to earlier, in terms of the officer member protocol that will be coming to council soon. That will be setting out in some more detail the types of information, how it will be provided, what members are entitled to be asking for, all those types of things that we know we need to improve on. Project management procurement, we've commissioned an external consultant who'll be joining us next week actually to begin the review of that complements the work that's already been done by Christine Parker and her team, and in terms of the recommendation that she made on review of the BER 4-5 project and project management in general. We've also set up a governance working group that will be meeting soon and alongside the property working group. So of those 3 working groups, 2 of them actually met today. First meeting for the project management working group. Property working group's in meeting for a while already, and the governance working group has got its first meeting coming up very shortly. So that's all I've got to say. So at this point I'll hand over to Sarah. I'm sure we'll go through her report in detail.
Thank you. It's nice to be back in your chamber, although I appreciate many of you will not have met me before. I'm Sarah Ironmonger. I am the engagement partner who signed your 1920 and 2021 accounts. On my far right is Matt Dean, who is your engagement lead for 21-22 and 22-23. And Nick, in between us, is the senior manager with that consistency, who's the person who is here on the ground. So that's why you see all 3 of us here tonight. We're presenting this interim annual auditor's report. The reason it is interim is there's a variety of different reasons for each of the 3 years, but what we were really keen on was to kind of get you into that catch-up place where we've caught up the 3 years, and so that you can be focusing on what you're doing now in response to this. So it's interim for 2021 because we've got some objections. Members may be aware that local government electors can make formal objections to the accounts. We are coming in to land on the last few of those, so we hope that we'll be able to close those soon. And as you know, 21-22 audit is just beginning. So this has to remain interim until those things have come to a conclusion, in case that work draws out anything else we want to report to you, so we will then update it if there is anything we need to report to you. So that's what this is. If I turn you to page 69, as Chris pointed out, it does look a little alarming with those red RAG ratings. Although many of you weren't here, 2021 it represented a change of code, so the National Audit Office sets the code the auditors follow. That changed in 2021, and we report against 3 criteria: governance, improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and financial sustainability. And we're required to give you a commentary on our view of those arrangements. So that's what this is. You can clearly see there are issues. And what I think I'd really encourage members is actually to understand after this meeting, how are you implementing the progress that you need to be making? You know, you want to be seeing that improvement as you get in, as the council stabilises and builds on from where you've been. So as you get into 23, 24, actually, are you seeing that improvement in some of these areas? So that's what I would sort of counsel you to be paying attention to going forward. What I plan to do is to just go through the executive summary. It's a very lengthy report. Happy to take questions on any of it, but I thought I'd just take you through the exec summary because that's just the kind of the headlines really. So on page 79, we move into governance is our first theme. And within that, you've got the council-wide governance and transparency. So I did sit in this chamber and present the statutory recommendations back in October 21. I think those have been well publicised about the challenges that you've had. Now, what that does lead us to is there were clearly issues, and we're saying there was a significant weakness in your arrangements around governance for each of the 3 years. Now, you have made progress. You did an action plan in response to our recommendations and in response to the independent monitoring officer, and you have made really good progress on those. But by the end of 22-23, not everything was fully implemented. So we're saying the significant weakness remains for each of those years. We can see things are improving. We just want to see that they're embedded before we lift that, and absolutely that'll be something we look at in 23-24. So that's that first area. Beneath that kind of council-wide governance is the service-level governance, and of course, rightly there was focus on the whole governance of the council. But actually, if you look at what was going on, Internal Audit have been publishing an increasing number of limited and no assurance internal audit reports. And actually, if we start to pull out some of the themes within that, there's a real common cause of either a lack of underlying policies and procedures or compliance with those. So what we're saying is actually this is really showing a weakness in your arrangements and your services, and you want to be seeing on one level, it's great you're getting that assurance, it tells you, but you want to be seeing that improvement and addressing those going forward. So we are saying that there is a significant weakness in that service governance. And then the final area within governance we've picked up is risk management. Our recommendations within risk management and reference to internal audit are all about improvement recommendations. So in terms of technicality, where we say there's a significant weakness, we have a key recommendation, and that's something we really want you to be paying attention to. Where we see something to improve, we will report that to you, but that's more about improving the arrangements. We're not saying that it's moving you more towards good practice and best practice rather than saying there's a significant weakness. So it's just understanding the distinction between those type of recommendations. So there's just a little bit we think that you can do to improve risk management. Internal audit that we're really pleased to see over the time period that actually relationships are really working and really improving, and we're seeing much better response to what internal audit is saying to you, and there's just a little thing which I think internal audit already had in place to get that external peer review, because that's good practice. So that's our headlines on governance. Looking at improving efficiency, economy, efficiency and effectiveness, in 2021, the Cabinet did not receive any reports in relation to the non-financial performance of the Council, and we therefore consider that a significant weakness. You should have been informed. I know many in this chamber were not members at that time, but that's our view. We can see improvements have been made. We can see actually there have been greater improvements in 22-23 at member requests to have greater clarity. So it's just an area that we think, it's a really important point. It's important to your residents. It's just something that you need to understand the performance of those services. So that's that area. Project and contract management has come up in the discussion around waivers. Clearly, we think that's a really important area. In this, we were aware of the Birth 4-5. The independent monitoring officer spoke about it. Internal audit has done a review, and we've looked at that, and we do think there were weaknesses in project management arrangements, and therefore we're calling that a significant weakness, again with a key recommendation. There are on the next page a couple of other elements of this where there's an objection that we just need to work through to see if there's anything else that comes out of it, and we're aware of more allegations that are being made. So we would just recommend that that's just something you just keep on your keep paying attention to. You know, when there's anything to report, and have every confidence internal audit will tell you when there is something to say, if there is something to say, but just keep that as an area, because it is really important that you get your project and contract management right. Turning to the third theme, which is financial sustainability, clearly, and we've referenced it today, financial sustainability in local government is a real challenge. It's a challenge for many, many authorities. There were a number of issues with the 2021 because of everything else that was going on. So those accounts have now been signed. But actually, there were no outturn reports coming to you as members for 21-22 or 22-23, and the accounts have been delayed. Now, that is not a position that any of us should be comfortable in, and it's whilst we completely understand the hard work officers have been doing, if an issue emerged, it's very hard for members to ask the right questions at the right time. I know how hard the finance team have been working and responding to us, and all the different calls on their time because of what's been going on for the council. But I think we're just saying to you, this really does need to be accelerated and picked up. I'm pleased to say, since we wrote this report, you have published your 21-22 accounts, and we've got a timetable for when 22-23 has happened. At this stage, we haven't identified anything that would have been very alarming that you should have heard about earlier, but we are just at the early stages of that audit. So I just think that's just something that we understand how it's happened, but we do think should be better going forward. And then of course that links into that final page around reserves and savings. There are you have managed your deficits in the past, you have managed to increase your reserves. They have been historically low for comparative councils, but you have got pressures when you look forward, and 5.8 million may not sound a large figure when you compare to some of the other local authorities, but it's quite large for you. And your options, the sooner you can tackle what savings plans, transformation you're going to do, the sooner you can implement them, which can help mitigate the size of those savings that you need to do. So, that's something that we're expecting to see you build on. And then the final point is around budget setting and how that's working, and really some improvements on that. And the very, very final point is on your capital project. I think you're aware that you've been very successful in being awarded funding for the town deal, the levelling up funds. They are large amounts of money. They rely on your governance arrangements and your project and contract management. Now, given that we have already criticised your governance arrangements and we have criticised your project management arrangements, these are areas you've managed to secure this funding for your residents. You need to make best use of that funding. So what we are saying to you is, you need to tackle these other issues so that you are making the best use of this. And so really that's kind of our whistle-stop tour through a 3-year. There's a lot to look forward to, that you understand your issues. You've got these issues here, but you do need to be making that progress. I'm really happy to pause there and take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Chris, for the introduction. I just want to make some comments myself as chair. I think your report's quite difficult reading. I think it's some of the issues raised and the challenges to the council running over that period are quite hard. I take some comfort from the fact that quite a bit of this is a lagging indicator, and I guess it's quite difficult as quite a new committee and quite a new management team of the council to deal with some of this, because we didn't start the fire and it's sort of afterwards trying to deal with some of the issues. I would say that we are on a path where improvements are being seen, but I completely accept the comments that you've made and the report, and I think it's a really good line in the sand point to reflect upon and say we've made some progress, but there's still a lot more to do. So thank you very much for your report, very, very robust. Members, does anybody have any comments? Councillor Garner to start.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. But I echo what Councillor Scobie says. It is a difficult report. And there's a lot in there. I mean, I'm one of the few who was here previously, so I've bear witness to some of the difficulties that we've been through previously. I've got a couple of things I just wanted to mention and ask about, really. The first is around that first page, page 69, and the 3 areas that remain red and have been red. In fact, there were 3 red, there were just 2 a couple of years ago. Now, I know we're all aware that there's a lot of work going on, a lot of people, a lot of officers are working very hard, our councillors are working very hard to improve this, but we need to, I think I need to, and we need to understand when we should expect to see these things changing, when the red turning from red to amber to green, so that we can understand when we should be concerned that it isn't turning that way. I mean, I assume one of my expectations, I think our expectations would be when we're sitting here this time next year for the next annual report, none of these will be red. And if any of them are red, then we don't want to get here next year and see them red. We want to be aware of that, so as we can try and do something about it. And so, you know, I've heard a lot of nice words about, yeah, we are working hard, we are doing a lot, but we really need to see some evidence of that happening. And maybe if you could comment on that. But if I can drill down to one area that it sort of links into that. One area that and I know a number of us are really concerned about, is that area around project and contract management. I mean, we all know, we've all read what happened with Birth Form 5. We all know that there was a very significant overspend there, and I think we accept that one of the main reasons for that was because of our lack of project management experience and not having the processes in place. As you say, we've got a much bigger budget now with the Levelling Up and Town Deal Fund. I know we're sort of pinning our hopes on the fact that we've applied to be part of a pilot scheme, and we're hoping that that pilot scheme, being a member of that pilot scheme, that will bring some of the project and contract management skills or knowledge that we don't necessarily have. But that can only be, for the council, I think it can only be a temporary sort of mitigation. That doesn't negate the need for us to really tackle that lack of project management and contract management expertise, experience, process and procedures, and whether or not we are part of that pilot scheme. In parallel, we need to be, I think we'll agree, we need to be tackling that issue so that when we come to our own projects, we don't have any issues, or if we do get any overspends, we know why early on, because we've got the rigorous processes and procedures in place. So there are 2 things there, and in fact that makes me think of a third one in a way, because you mentioned we are receiving from internal audits reports a lot of limited or no assurance, and that's been happening for quite a long time, and a lot of that is, as you said, because of a lack of processes and procedures in place. That one, yes, it's good that we're identifying that and we can do something about it, but we really need to start seeing things being done about it. You know, and there's a lot there to be done, so we need to see that plan happening. So I think that covers what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, your points are very valid. You are on a journey, and it is very challenging when you've had the experience you've had as a council. I think there are a number of elements. You know, you do now have a senior management team that are now in post, so you get that stability there that can drive in some of that change, particularly around getting policies and procedures. There are other local authorities that you can learn from, and getting that culture of compliance where people are actually doing things in line with those policies and procedures that you have agreed. So that's a very, very good starting point and somewhere that needs to happen. You know, you will want to be sitting here in a year's time seeing improvements from what we've got to say, but actually there will be things that you should be seeing coming through before then. So yeah, it's great that internal audit will look at very specific services and tell you what they're seeing, because that's step one. If you know what's happening, you've got a chance to do it. Actually, if you'll be getting updates during the year, and you would want to see where previous issues have been identified and reported, that those recommendations are being implemented and that you are seeing progress. So that may well show you your direction of travel as you progress during the year. It may be that you want to talk to officers and ask for update. So what I've seen at other councils where we've had some very difficult messages, actually they've said after 6 months, can we have an update from officers on where you think we are against our recommendations? I think there's something around this group within the Audit Committee, asking those questions when you see something and going, hang on a sec, is this making us move forward, so that you keep that focus. So if you've got external audit, internal audit, officers and members all focused on that improvement, it gives you your best chance of this looking significantly better next year. Yeah, there's always the opportunity that some specific project has gone wrong and there'll be something reported. But I think, you know, if we look at that financial sustainability, you know, I know the conversations I'm having with Chris, you know, around catching that up and getting that in a better position, that should look better from everything we understand, you know. But actually, if you're not getting outturn reports, you know, asking those questions, if you're not, you know, if the you understanding why you're not getting pieces of information, yeah, is important because of the difficulties, yeah, and I can't quite emphasise so much just how much the finance team that we'd normally deal with have not been able to focus on maybe what we might normally see, because they're dealing with all these other pieces. You know, if you can stabilise that, they can go back to focusing on what they normally do. You start to make that progress. You know, so that is a really important piece within this. I think, yeah, that project management, with the size of funding you've got, yes, take the help you can from a pilot scheme, but actually you need to be thinking about what skills do you need within the council to deliver that, and that may be something that you want to be asking questions on and seeking assurances, you know, but almost don't just wait for the external auditor to tell you. In 12 months' time, you have other sources of assurance that you can gain.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Bright coming in, and then Councillor Towning.
Thank you for your report and welcome back. So reporting is a bit of a bugbear for me. I would, and I note with interest that you identify it as a bit of a weakness, particularly we have these huge projects that we need to manage. Now, the issue that I have is I've asked for reports, and I'm part of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and we've asked for reports, and are variously being told that either the projects are too complex to give you simple enough reports, or we don't have the officer time to give you in-depth reports. Now, what does good look like for a project? Do you, as an external auditor, do you have a view on what a good report on a project that could keep us updated might look like? Because I'm really concerned that there are these big projects and we are not given. I don't want to get to a stage where these projects are in danger of being delivered and we haven't been able to scrutinise it or to audit it properly.
So,
I mean, there's plenty of examples of good practice in project management reporting, and certainly Chris and I can sort of talk about some of those examples. The theme that I would draw out, though, is you want to know, are we on track with what we're trying to achieve? And if you're going off track, you want to know that early so that you can make decisions about what to do about that. Now, projects go off track for a number of reasons, but you want to know and understand what those reasons are, and would you make a different decision? Yeah, and that is the point of project management and the point of understanding it. There are authorities who are able to do this. It is time consuming. Capital projects of this size often sit at much larger authorities who have a much larger officer team, and some of this is your risk reward sort of balance between how much you want to spend on some of that buying that skill in, whether it's consultancy or your own people, and how much you've got to manage some of your other services, and you do have to wrestle with some of those conversations. I think what I would encourage you is, if you're not getting the answers you want, really engage with the officers to come up with a plan, because the current senior officers that we're dealing with have been very responsive to us. We've had good answers, and we can have a debate with them, and that's important about how we move forward.
Councillor Bright, do you just want to come back then? I'm going to bring Chris in.
Yeah, I would just like to add the other point that I would kind of like to remind officers particularly, is that we're quite a good resource in terms of just, things will go wrong. I think we all know that things will go wrong on these enormous projects. A lot of the challenges that we're going to be faced as a council are external. There's inflationary pressures on building materials, etc. And quite often you get a lot of voices out in the community criticising the work that the council are doing. And quite frankly, a lot of the councillors and the members of all stripes are the first on platforms defending officers, defending the work that the council is doing. So the more information that we have got to say, look, yes, it went wrong, but here's why, or yes, it went wrong, but don't worry, this is being done instead. The more information we've got, the more transparency we've got, the better job we can do, making sure that we're standing by the officers throughout the organisation and making sure that they're defended where they need to be.
Thank you. Chris, do you want to come in?
Chair. A couple of things there on the reporting and project management. Lots of these projects are large capital schemes, and I know there have clearly been reported there was some weakness in our budget monitoring and out-term reporting, which has largely been addressed now. The report that Matt and his team produced, we've been making sure that the information there on the individual schemes, whether it's Margate Town Deal or Levelling Up projects, is at a more granular level, so that it's not just held saying levelling up X million pound. We've got a breakdown below that. Where we are with a lot of those schemes, if they've not actually got into actual delivery phase yet in terms of the planning, they're still at an early stage of delivery, which is probably why you're not seeing that information coming through. However, we've got structures in place within our at an officer level now to manage those projects at a corporate level. So there's high importance strategic projects. They'll be going through the project board that was referred to in the covering reports, and we've got the as I was saying earlier, the projects reporting be in the budget monitor report that go to Cabinet on a quarterly basis. Just I suppose in form of defence, just looking at the recommendations. So Councillor Garner's question about when it will get better, I think in terms of recommendation 5 around the outturn and budget monitoring, that has already improved. 21-22 was an unusual time for us in terms of where we were at the outturn point then. When we typically would have been producing that report, the chief executive left the organisation, as did pretty much the rest of the top management tier. Matt and I were spread very thin in terms of our ability to produce those reports. The final accounts themselves were outstanding as well, which meant that we weren't in a position to say what the final position was. I think in a perfect world, if we'd had the resource, we still would have brought a draft outturn report. By the time the accounts were closer to completed and the 21-22 are still being audited now, the time had passed. So when you're looking at financial reporting, timeliness is as important as your accuracy. So there was seen to be little value in bringing the 21-22 budget out-term report then, because the accounts are still being audited. We'd already got into 22-23 budget monitoring. We'd set the 23-24 budget. The ship had kind of sailed at that point. 22-23 out-term report, I'm pleased to say, has already been reported, so that's gone to Cabinet. So I would consider those two out-term reports discharged, and Matt and I, we're working with the team to make sure that the recommendation in there is limited to a 2-month time lag. That's not as easy as it sounds. That is, in some instances, particularly when you've got a Christmas break in the middle of it, if you're reporting at the end of December, to get a report pulled together at the end of February with the committee timetable, it is quite challenging, and we're working in order to do that. And then just finally, on the performance reporting, acknowledge the weakness there in 2021, but it was a really weird year. It was in the middle of the pandemic, and some things we just had to stop doing. There was limited officer capacity to get in order to make sure we were still functioning, and unfortunately performance management was one of them that fell by the wayside, but we recognise that's not something we would ever want to be doing under business as usual, and we have addressed that and made improvements subsequently.
Thank you, Chris. I have Councillor Towning, Councillor Davis and Councillor Manners down to speak, so I'll come to you first, Councillor Towning. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Well, how nice to see you again. I want to go back to my questions that I have raised in the past with you, and I'm sure you are familiar with where I'm going now. The 2018-2021 period, when I raised on a number of occasions the non-disclosure payments that were made. Unfortunately, I was put to one side purely because there was a different investigation taking place, and we couldn't really go down that road. Well, I do believe that we are responsible for the management of the public funds of this institution of ours. But no one has ever, I'm not interested in who got paid, who never got paid. I'm interested in how much was paid. But no one has ever told us that. And I do believe that we are entitled to know that, and we should be told. The other point I'd like to make, sir, is that your great report, I think it covers a lot of areas. And I think it was a difficult one to write because there's so much has happened. The council has changed remarkably. With a new 151 officer, you know, who does a great job. You talk about improvements, and there have been improvements, but what you don't talk about is improvements that haven't happened and what those improvements are. So when will we find out what improvements you're looking for to improve further? Because we don't know what what is outstanding in your thinking of the workings of the council. Thank you.
On the NDAs, I think there's two elements of that. One is we have an objection related to non-disclosure agreements that we are drawing to a close on. So we will respond to that elector. In terms of the amounts paid, those will have been in the accounts. They are disclosed in a note to the accounts, and I'm sure the finance team can show you exactly which ones in each year. So they are disclosed. They may not. Any exits package will be disclosed in the accounts. So that information is there.
Further to that as well, so for any senior officer, if there was a termination agreement or an exit package, that would be specified by the officer level. So if you're talking about the previous corporate management team, when we entered into those arrangements with them, they were under sort of closed session because they were private sort of employment matters, but we're very clear that those amounts would be disclosed within our accounts. I think one of them certainly has been published, the other one will be in 22-23, certainly the high value ones that were in there. So there is that transparency, it's a requirement for us to do it. Any other value related to an exit package that is not relating to a senior officer will be in there, but it's in a banded table. So you'll be able to see the number of exit packages that we've agreed to, or I think it's difficult not to confuse perhaps the difference or conflate non-disclosure agreements with exit packages. Sometimes an exit package can happen for other reasons. Sometimes an exit package may include what you might refer to as a non-disclosure agreement. We don't break that down in the accounts, but what we will give you is a list of, if I'm right, it'll be redundancies and then other exit agreements, and you can see that in a tabular format within the accounts. I'm happy to show you where they are. They'll be on our website up to 21-22. Yeah.
So just for clarity, then, so that information, some of that is available now, and some of that is coming soon in accounts.
Correct. So the 22-23. So I mean, to perhaps address the elephant in the room. If you're looking at the exit of the previous deputy chief executive, that is published in the 21-22. If you're looking for the previous chief executive, that will be in our soon-to-be-published draft 22-23 accounts, and that's all just on the public record. I suppose, again, as Sarah said, this has been considered as part of an objection to the accounts as to whether it's appropriate, because exit packages can be used appropriately as a tool for an individual or an officer to leave the organisation without attributing blame to either party for appropriate reasons. They can be used appropriately. What you've got to make sure is that they're not used inappropriately, and I think that's the whole point of the objection, to look at have these exit packages been used in a disproportionate or inappropriate manner. Just finally, last point, the other thing to bear in mind is any exit package over £100,000 has to be approved by full council. So again, in terms of talking about the authority that officers have to enter exit packages, that's capped at 100,000, and that includes the pension strain as well, doesn't it? So in terms of the value of someone's accessing their pension early, full council would need to consider that. And believe it or not, that's actually sometimes not that relatively senior officers. If you're talking about the value of someone's pension plus a redundancy, you can get into what you would consider perhaps relatively junior officers if they've got long service attached to them. So, sorry, that was a roundabout way of saying it is out there, but I'm happy to have further discussions with the Council of Town if there's anything particularly you want sight of.
Just specific to that, and I know we've got 3 speakers, but just specifically to that, does the council have D&O insurance on senior officers? And if there was a payout related to that, how would that be treated in the accounts? Would that be a deduction of the payments, or would that be separately? Maybe a bit of a specific issue, so.
Amy's better to speak to the specific insurance policies.
Yes,
She's our insurance
we do
expert.
hold that type of insurance.
In terms of the accounting treatment, we'd show it gross, so we would still show the value of the settlement, and then the income would be separate. We wouldn't net them off in terms of not disclosing, but as Amy said, I mean, I'm not aware of and not made any claims against that.
Okay, interesting. Apologies to the other speakers. Councillor Davis, I've got you next.
Thank you, Chair, and again, thank you, Sarah and colleagues, for what we know for some time has been a very robust and far-reaching report. And I'm pleased to see that it's still being investigated, because some of us do know what a can of worms Berth 4 and 5 actually is, and continues to be. What I wanted to ask was, and again, it relates to our corporate priority of transparency, the administration's commitment to it, Grant Thornton's recommendations. We do have, I'm not trying to steal a word off my colleague here, we seem to have a cultural issue here, in that there are certain officers and departments that will go out of their way to avoid any member involvement in setting up the terms of governance. An example on this is what I mentioned earlier, the Shared Prosperity Fund, and why this is relevant is because we're going to be asked to approve this evening a report that says that the distribution in the future of the lottery funds will follow the model that has been established for the Shared Prosperity Fund. The Shared Prosperity Fund is 1.15 million, therefore a key decision the process has not come through overview and scrutiny or cabinet. You've got officers making decisions as to who will attend meetings, how members are expected.
Councillor Davis.
But those governance issues, sorry, Chair, if I may.
Well, no, just if I may say, we're obviously going to cover that agenda item. When we have that discussion, to have had the officers' input before we discuss it, because some members may not be fully aware of what you're referring to. So I understand you're making a more general point.
What we're trying to drill to is there is a cultural issue here, and it has got worse rather than better, despite Ms Ironmonger's recommendations that in order to avoid repetition of issues, the council should seek to immediately apply the lessons learned. We don't have to have working groups, consultations, pity parties or anything else for officers to actually do the job they are employed to, rather than look like a good advert for the Peter principle at times. Because it's either incompetence or something else is very wrong when members are being denied their constitutional right to engage with the community.
Okay, I think your comments are noted, and we will obviously cover them again in the agenda. It's fine. You're entitled to make your comments, but we'll pick them up again when we come onto that agenda item specifics when the officers introduce that. Councillor Manners, I had you down next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah. I was only elected for the first time in May, so it is when I first stood, I was told by several former members, don't even go there. There were serious aspersions cast on the transparency and efficacy of this organisation, and they said you're going to be banging your head against a brick wall. So it is encouraging when I see that there is work being done here on governance, but there is a feeling, I'm sort of coming across a culture, as John has mentioned, where you do feel that you're kept in the dark. I mean, I see here, for example, that there seems to be a cultural issue. I noticed on your report here, where are we? External Auditor's Annual Audit Report on Value for Money, that there's a property working group being set up. I mean, we only find out about these things post-mortem. We don't have any say in how they're constituted or how they come about. But my question would be, why is there no member involvement in that process? When you think about the property assets that exist in our respective wards, we know what the footfall is, we know what the local market conditions might be like, we know what problems local traders might be facing. We know what opportunities might exist there, perhaps more so than professionals that get parachuted in with fat consultancy fees. But we're not consulted, we're kept in the dark about this. When we're looking at John's mentioned about the Levelling Up Fund, which you've mentioned, £1.15 million. The community money that's being allocated there is really important to the community. It's a really efficient way of delivering benefits to the community, probably a lot more efficient than many of the council services without the apportioned overhead and so on. And community groups do a really amazing job in getting the money where it's most needed. And yet all of the decisions on that appear, we're only finding this out again post-mortem because there was no consultation with any elected members, that the entirety of the decision-making process for that is down to officers with no input whatsoever, again, from members. So, as I say, I mean, it just comes back to this feeling that members are very often simply kept in the dark, and that there are still cultural changes that need to be made in the governance here. Thank you.
I mean, I think we've said before that you are definitely on a journey. Here, when I talked about the council-wide governance, I referred to the statutory recommendations that I made in October 21, and one of those was about reaching an agreed understanding about officer and member relationships, interaction, and that is definitely, it's not easy. I don't think there's any council that actually really has got that exactly right, but it was definitely something that you need to be working on, because statutory recommendations that we use, that power, that's quite rare to use. You know, there's a lot of councils up and down the country who've never had that type of recommendation given to them at that profile. So yeah, that expresses the level of seriousness that we were taking with it. The independent monitoring officer came up with some recommendations. There is progress being made around kind of what are some of these behavioural issues, and the restructure of the senior management team, just so that you've got permanent people that you could be building those relationships and have those difficult conversations about. And it is a balance between, there's a lot of operational pieces that members won't have the sight on because it needs to operationally happen. It's just around getting that framework really clear, so you know. I often talk about governance being almost like on a football pitch. You want to know if it's going outside of the lines. You don't necessarily need to know if things are just running alongside the lines that you want them to be. So I think there's a piece around understanding which projects, which working groups merit having member involvement, or at what stage, because actually at some points the officers can do an awful lot of work and then bring it to you with going, actually we've looked at these different options, because your time is limited as well, you know, you're not full-time members of staff, and so I think there is a process here, but you are coming from a backdrop of that relationship not working. I'm not going into the reasons why it didn't work, but it wasn't working in a productive way, and it is just an area that we really think, you know, we thought was wrong. We've said so. You have made progress, and I think it's one that just needs to keep working away at. I know the chief exec, I know the senior officers will be very keen to do that, and it's about having those conversations. A lot of them maybe not in this chamber. It's around those conversations around how do we do this? Let's have an agreed understanding, because I think that's where we come from. You need an agreed understanding about where you have involvement, what you're informed about, what comes back to you. I was just going to say, my colleague Nick, that's why we bring him, reminded me when one of you asked about procurement and contract management. We did actually, Grant Thornton did actually issue like a national report based on sector research last month. So I will send that to Chris, and he can circulate that to you. I mean, it's publicly available, but it just gives some messages of what we've seen across the country.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I just come back on that briefly?
And then I'm going to bring in the monitoring officer.
Yeah, I didn't want to paint a portrait of it being entirely gloom and doom. The training that we had was really useful, and it's really and it was sort of it demonstrates a commitment to changing the culture here. I would like to see more on that, and I think that's a top-down thing that comes from the chief executive to work with the officers to engage more with members, and I hope that will happen, that there will be a process where officers will be encouraged to engage with members. Thanks.
Just before the monitoring officer comes in, we've definitely progressed in the last 3 years. I don't have members contacting me most weeks with concerns. That is a step forward, because that's not the auditor's role to be managing that, whereas I think most of those conversations are happening with officers.
Thank you. Ingrid, do you want to come in?
Really just to say, obviously I've just been in post a little over a month now, and I've got a real sense that there's an absolute commitment to changing the culture of the past. And obviously one of the things that I was tasked with, even before I started actually, was looking at the member officer protocol. And I know I mentioned that previously, but one of the key features of that is how members and officers work together, obviously, but it's also about the flow of information between members and officers. And I'm really keen that we get that right. And so I've prepared an initial draft. It's for discussion, and obviously members will be considering that. And so I hope going forward that working relationship and those boundaries will be much clearer, and that you, as members with all sorts of other commitments, don't have to get bogged down in the tiny minutiae of operational detail, but that you feel that you're getting enough information to properly exercise your duties. And so I'm really committed to that, and I'm really committed to making sure that you're all involved in looking at that and reviewing at that, and that we get this right for Thanet District Council. The other thing I'd like just to say is that if you've got any concerns about constitutional impropriety in any regard, please do bring them to my attention, and I absolutely undertake to look into those, thoroughly and fully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. I've got Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. My colleagues have virtually said everything, but I would like to say something. Not many of you know, I was right in the thick of what happened with the senior management team. But what I would like to do, I would like it noted to say thank you to Chris, because I don't think, without Chris Blundell, I don't think we would have been on the ship that we're on now. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. And before we close, I just want to make one comment that I don't think has actually been covered here, and that is the role of us as members here. We've had a lot of discussion about culture with the council. Clearly, the report goes into this. We have responsibility as well, and we cannot overlook the fact that a lot of these problems do come back to the political realities here. You cannot have, over the last 12 years where there has been no majority control of the council, there have been 8 changes of administration. There have been 7 different leaders over those 12 years, 3 different chief executives. We have to take some responsibility for that as members. And this committee very often can be, I'm going to say this, and I'm sure the finance team are going to be devastated, and the auditors, can be quite dry. Can be quite difficult, can be quite a hard committee to follow. But if we do not do this work of supporting officers and challenging, the discussion that we've just had has been a long one. It is great that members are challenging and asking questions. This is exactly what this committee needs to do, and I thank everybody for the discussion. And we, coming all the way back to the start of this agenda item is down to be approved. Can I have a proposer and a seconder, please, down for approval? Councillor Towning to propose. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Davis. Are members agreed? Thank you very much, members. So sticking with external audit, agenda item 8 is the external audit plan 2021-22. Again, I have you down, Chris, but I'm assuming this will be to introduce and pass over to Grant Thornton.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just pass this one straight over to Matt. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Chair, and I'll keep this one relatively brief. So this is effectively our final audit plan for 21-22. You'll have seen a draft of this at the previous meeting. Just as part of our process, now we've progressed significantly through the planning, we can bring you this final version. There is very limited change to this, to the version that was shared to the previous committee. There was a slight change to our draft materiality calculation, which is on page 138 of the pack, but the rest of it should be as you'd have seen at the previous meeting. So that's all I wanted to say on that at this stage. Happy to take any further questions.
Thank you very much. Members, do you have any questions on this report? No. So this is down for our information. We just need to... Are members happy to note the report? Do we need a proposer in a seconder for that?
No.
Members happy to note the report? Okay. We were potentially planning on moving the agenda around to when we had the cybersecurity update, but we are going to stick with the numbers. So we're going to go to agenda item 9, quarterly internal audit report, and Christine, I believe you're reporting this because Simon's not available.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. If I could take you, please, members, to page 149 of the agenda pack, and the report before you is the summary of work that's been able to be completed and finalised with management for the last quarter. In fact, it's been quite a short interval since our last meeting. So the details on page 153 in the table highlight the 3 pieces of work that were concluded in time with management to be included within the pack. And we've heard quite a bit of talk this evening around a number of lower level assurance reports coming forward. So it's pleasing to show you a table with a substantial opinion, and 2 substantial opinions, and a split opinion really with the limited. The work with the housing benefit testing that we undertake has got not applicable against it. We don't provide an assurance opinion because we're doing a random set of tests to support the subsidy claim and the early work. It's kind of like an early, like a litmus test really. As the year goes through, we pick the samples to see how the year end might look. So there's no assurance on that one, but you'll see that we had some good results with the testing there. So the only area really to highlight from the work there, and the table shows you there the number of critical, high, medium and low recommendations that we've made as well within those reports. is paragraph 2.3.2, and that highlights the executive summary for the area with partially limited assurance. The report itself was split really between the planning side of matters, which had a reasonable assurance, and for the Section 106 agreements, which had a limited assurance. So we split the assurance there. The action plan has been agreed with management, and the management response is shown there, well, the bottom of page 156 over into 157. And they are highlighting that good progress has already been made in delivering the agreed actions. So there are 15 recommendations in total, 8 with high priority, 3 with medium, and 4 with low. So, of course, members, we will be bringing our independently tested progress report back in due course, but it's nice to have the management response confirming that's moving forward. And a lot of that hinges on that new post being recruited to and those things that we were looking to see being done there. Moving through the report to page 153, paragraph 3 details the progress reports. And again, noting the comment before about project management and contract management, is really would like to draw your attention there to the good progress being made on the plan maintenance and contract management there. So now members seeing there are no outstanding recommendations there, and it's now assessed as reasonable assurance. That's really good progress in a short period of time for you. In fact, there are virtually no, I haven't got it in front of me now, there are no recommendations outstanding at all in all of those pieces of work that we've undertaken. I think we've just heard from the previous report, what is it you're expecting to be done and by when, and these action plans are exactly the thing that you want to see moving on. And when we come back, every audit is a snapshot in time, but when we're bringing news back to you like this, that is a clear message. That said, field work has been completed on a couple of other progress reports, but due to delays with the client, they've been unable to be included in tonight's agenda. We will be obviously now looking to bring those progress reports to you to the next meeting. I say next meeting, there may be an extraordinary meeting, so it will be the next regular meeting, which will be probably the March meeting. So looking at the table of outstanding of audits with lower levels of assurance that are yet to be followed up, which is on page 165, I will be making some changes to the dates there. Another matter that we've heard quite a bit about already in tonight's agenda in terms of progress and what's happening is related to the timing of the Birth 4 or 5 follow-up review. We had originally planned to undertake that in December. The report, of course, came to Council in March, and the agreed action plan obviously had some due dates agreed in it. I can obviously update you, as you've already heard, that the Council has now recruited to the resources there. They've brought in some specialist skills to help with the project management framework and the training and all of those key recommendations made within that report. So I wanted to highlight that there will be a delay in me undertaking that work. It's sensible to do so. If I did it today, it will just be the same as it was when we last looked. There won't be any evidence of any change for me to test and independently report back that it's in and it's embedded and it's working well. So that said, I don't even think it's likely that we will have undertaken that work by March to report to you in the March report. So I think we just need to keep that one on that chart, remind members. In the meantime, you are tolerating the risks of those actions not having been completed, but I know you're well aware of that, but I need to just draw your attention to it. So moving through the rest of the report, we include our balanced scorecard of performance indicators. I did have the figures included to the end of September, to the end of quarter 2. Of course, by the end of this month will be the end of quarter 3. I have no concerns about resources to the end of December, but I do need to let the committee know that we've sadly received a resignation from one of our auditors who sought promotion away from local government entirely, actually. So we will have a vacancy. Our advert has gone live today, or this on Monday. So it really depends on how long we are in that period of vacancy, so how badly that impacts our audit plan and plan completion. We will look, if it's going to be lengthy, we'll obviously be looking to backfill and buy some contractor days in to try and keep the plan days high. I think we're probably targeted to achieve 98% to the end based on the current resources. So obviously I'll be reporting in March if there's been any real significant impact, but we're well on target as to the end of Q3. The report before you members is to be received, and I'm happy to take any questions you may wish to raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. There's a point I want to make. First of all, great to see the progress that's being made, and it echoes. I spoke at Cabinet recently about this, about the number of limited and no assurances, and there is a real focus coming from officers and from the Cabinet to look into this. So we've had reports recently that showed areas of concern around equality and diversity, around health and safety, and I'm glad to see that there is progress taking place on those, including the establishment of a Cabinet advisory group around equality and diversity. So that's promising to see. One matter that you raised, and we've had some correspondence about, is about the report into East Kent ICT, which was obviously, we were trying to tie this together with an update. It was originally on the agenda from head of East Kent, and one of the things that Chris, Ingrid and I were working out is to try and tie together 3 topics of discussion: the risk register, where cybersecurity is our top risk, an internal audit update with recommendations on a management response, and an update from the technical specialists about what was going on. That has not happened tonight, but that is the reason why we'll be looking to have an extraordinary meeting, because as I understand it, there is a impending milestone of the 1st of April when changes are going to be made. So when our meeting comes in March, it may be too late for members to have some input and oversight of some of the outstanding recommendations. So, Chris, I don't know if you want, before we take member questions, you just want to address that.
I think you've summed it up perfectly. Christine's team have done the vast majority of the field work. It's been drafted for a little while, so we're just waiting for management's response to that to be pulled together. I believe the report has already gone to Dover committee, or is due to go to Dover's committee soon, because Dover, Canterbury and Thanet have a shared cybersecurity team, so lots of the findings that have been found there will also be present in Thanet's. So we want to get that report to committee as soon as possible, but as the Chair rightly said, that shared service is being disaggregated and it comes back in-house on the 1st of April, so I think it's really important that the committee has sight of the internal audit finance report and has that update from the head of ICT, from Dan Evans, at the same time, in a timely manner as well, that allows you to actually make timely, meaningful comments on any of the issues that are presented in that internal audit before the service is disaggregated and brought back in-house.
So look out for that meeting. We'll try and find a date that works for everybody. No doubt, knowing the officers, there may be additional agenda items that get slipped in. I think we're already anticipating a couple, but hopefully we'll keep it quite a focused meeting. Councillor Garner.
Thank you, and thank you, Christine, for the report. I'd like to ask about the report, part of the report that covers Section 106 and the processes around Section 106s. Since becoming a councillor 4.5 years ago, and this has been an area, because I'm on the planning committee, I have been since I've been a councillor, but Section 106 is one of the areas that has caused me a lot of frustration and a lot of disappointment, in that I've found it incredibly difficult, and I think, as you've partly highlighted, to find out anything about what happens with Section 106 agreements here. It's almost impossible to find out details of all the Section 106 agreements, any of them, whether and progress made against Section 106 agreements, whether monies have been collected as promised when trigger points have been reached, and then whether they've then been appropriately spent on the areas that they should have been spent on. I mean, I won't go on, but I do have one experience when I was a very new councillor, chasing up about playgrounds in my ward. I found out that there was £150,000 had been sitting in an account for nearly 3 years to upgrade all of the playgrounds in Broadstairs. I'm not quite sure what would have happened if I or anyone else hadn't have caused a little bit of a fuss about it. But in the end, the playground's got replaced. So I am looking forward to the reports being produced for 19, 20, 2021, 21, 22, 22, 23, and hoping that they do contain a complete audit trail of all of the Section 106 agreements, the evidence of all of them, any monies that have been collected, and evidence of how they've all been spent. Because I suspect there will be a few surprises that we might want to have a good look at. I'm slightly puzzled that I'm sure the other, or maybe they're not, but the other districts within East Kent, so Dover, Canterbury City and Folkestone High, how are they measuring up with their Section 106 agreements? Would you say that councillors on in each of those districts are equally as frustrated and disappointed when they want to find out details about any of their Section 106 agreements? And we talked about learning from other councils. What can we learn from them?
Thank you, Councillor Garner. Christine, do you want to come in on that?
Thank you, Chair. I think there hasn't been a time in my career when we've audited Section 106 and not had a number of recommendations around that whole audit trail reconciliation, whether there's RPI, whether they're index linked, all of the... And I wonder, just musing, whether it's one of those functions that does become a bit siloed across professions. So I think this post that you've recruited to here will be very key in having that oversight view of them. There's clearly a timing delay, isn't there, from the point of agreeing one when it's, the dirt hasn't even been dug in the ground to sometime in the future when the trigger point's reached, and as you rightly say, then how it's allocated. And without excellent records, things can be lost. Every time we've tried to reconcile in the past, we've always found some that are on some sheets and not on other sheets. So it's a wonderful opportunity here to get this right now. But yeah, I would say we've always had a number of recommendations in this area each time we've audited it.
Just say, because it is an area that members of the public are interested in, and it affects them a lot. Especially when we have a number of planning applications that a number of residents are not happy with, or they make objections to, and one of the things they do see, well actually, when delivering this development, you will also get this amount of money for hospitals, you will also get this amount of money for playgrounds and this amount. So they want to be seeing that, and I know, I'm sure others do, a number of residents contact me about, well, when are we going to see any of this? You know, going back to planning applications 3 or 4 years ago. So it would be nice for us all to be readily armed with facts about this has been delivered, this is what you're getting, and it just makes it a lot easier for residents to accept things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garner. I've got Councillor Manners and Councillor Davis. Councillor Manners.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just responding to what Councillor Garner's just said. It was very prescient what he had to say about Section 106 money. At the last council, when Jackie Baker's was on the agenda, it was only an intervention from a councillor, John Davis, where the Section 106 money was found down the back of the sofa. It seemed pretty obvious that it had been forgotten about. So having a proper register of 106 commitments would be very, very useful, I think. Thank you.
If I can just comment on that point, because obviously Jackie Baker's is in the ward that I represent in Northwood, and it's been quite a focus for us. I can assure you that money was not down the back of the sofa. And in fact, today a master plan for Jackie Baker's was actually published on the agenda for overview and scrutiny. It includes quite an investment from the council, and there was a report produced by external consultants back in March that actually covered those figures. So I am grateful for Councillor Davis for his question, and I believe there was an FOI or a request put into the press office from one of the local papers which brought that money up. But I can assure you that figure was not lost down the back of a sofa and was factored in when they were planning Jackie Bakers. But I take the point. Councillor Davis.
Hopefully it wasn't sitting on something else down the back of the sofa that stopped it getting lost. So, I just wanted to confirm because 106 is a big issue. I know, for instance, that Cliffsend Parish Council are having a lot of frustrations with trying to get answers because Cliffsend's got a 50% increase in its size, not a penny spent. In fact, tomorrow morning at 9:15, we're visiting a site that's running on to the end of its time frame. My understanding is that the council is or has recruited a specific officer to manage 106 monies and so on. Is that the case, or where are we at with it?
Chris, would you be able to respond to that? I think that was in the budget.
Matt's probably better placed to answer that one than I am.
It's actually covered in the report. The post has been recruited, so.
Okay, members, as no changes have been proposed to the 2023-24 internal audit, this is down for receiving it and noting it. Are members happy to receive the report and note it? Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Davis proposed, Councillor Garner seconded. All members agreed? Thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item 10, we have the Audit Committee Assurance Statement. Chris, would you like to introduce the report?
Thank you. I'll try and keep this one brief, as I appreciate it's been a long meeting already and there's a couple of still quite meaty, substantive items left on the agenda. So the purpose of this document is effectively to try and improve or at least demonstrate effective two-way communication between the council's external auditors who were with us earlier and the Governance and Audit Committee. So Annex 2 actually sets out the response to the questions. The rest of it's just addressing around the document. I think, as you see in the document, sets out under various different headings: general inquiries of management, fraud, laws and regs, related parties, easy for me to say, going concern and accounting estimates. I won't go through all of them because there's quite a lot of detail in there, but I think probably the most poignant and important one to draw your attention to is, sorry, I'm working off a different set of pages to the full agenda pack, but page 10 of this of Annex 2 on the fraud risk assessment, the third question there, where we did identify some fraud through a whistleblowing activity. An officer identified something. It was reported to internal audit and actually investigate as part of their audit on the planned maintenance audit. As part of that, you can see we then undertook some remeasurement of the work. What had happened was the long and short of it, we'd been charged for external decorations and rendering on properties that did not have render. So there was a little bit more than sharp practice. We had those remeasures. We recovered the money through outstanding invoices that were already due on the system, so we weren't exposed to any sort of overcharging, and it was reported through the sort of standard processes. I think it was actually Matt that did the reporting himself through to the police. My understanding, the latest position of the police weren't intending to take any further action due to the size of the fraud was not considered significant enough. That's the main part of it. The rest of it's fairly sort of procedural stuff that you would see in a year by year sort of standard reporting of these types of issues, because they talk about the type of controls that we have in place to report these things to you. What we would typically do is actually, myself, well, usually Matt, would write this, and we would bring this to the chair of the committee and run it past them as chair to sign it off rather than bring it to the full committee. That's one of the recommendations, but obviously happy to take questions on that, and the committee may have different views as to whether they wish to see this document in the future.
Do members have any comments or questions? So there are two recommendations down: that we note and approve the responses, and that in the future this is delegated to the 151 officer and myself, or in consultation with myself, to detail these. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation? Councillor Packman, seconded by Councillor Britcher. Are members agreed? Agreed, thank you very much. We are now on to agenda item 11, risk management. I have Amy down to go through this report. Amy, would you be happy if I just made a comment first, just from the discussions we had? You will notice there is a change to the report this time, and it is at my request, and we agreed at the chairman's briefing. Every meeting we've had on the list the key risks, and then we've had supplementary documents showing emerging risks, future risks. I think those are important for us to note from time to time, but there is a lot of information in there, and those risks, because of the way they're scored, are obviously much lower priority than some of the larger risks. So at previous committees that I've noticed, we don't talk about cybersecurity and the economic environment, the things that will actually impact services. We will talk about a much smaller risk that may be emerging and people are concerned about, but we shouldn't be talking about it every committee. So as a balance, we'll be having the main risk register coming every committee, and then twice a year we will have those emerging and future risks. Just so then we are focused as a committee on those key risks, but members will be given an opportunity to look at those emerging and future risks, but just not at every meeting. So apologies, Amy, over to you to introduce the report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So this report provides the Governance and Audit Committee with a quarterly review of the corporate risks. So just before I go into the risk scoring, as you can all see on page 7, I would like to just take a few moments to give members some background information and also an update on our current progress. So as you can probably see, the strategy does define corporate risks as those which impact across the whole council. And that is exactly what we've just been talking about. These are the huge risks that are from the bottom upwards. Through service planning and continuous review during the year, this is how they're identified. Operational risks can be also escalated into larger corporate risks, as we know. And this is dependent on the evaluation of the risk and throughout discussions with the senior management team. So this strategy demands that the risks are to be assessed by the corporate management team and by the Governance and Audit Committee on a regular basis. So just to give a bit of background, and I know there are a couple of councillors here that were here last year when we changed the strategy, but there's a lot of new faces as well this year. So the previous policy had been in place for some time. I believe it was about 2019. And because of that, we did run the risk, if you excuse the pun, of it becoming a tick box exercise, and it was with little value in the end. So we were keen for officers and members to become engaged in risk management, to become proactive, and as a local authority, rather than just reacting when risk occurred, actually proactively dealing with the risk before they actually started. So this was then approved at the Governance and Audit Committee on the 27th of July last year. So consequently, we are in the process of transitioning to operating under the new risk management strategy. We're constantly looking at the way that we approach this, not just with you guys, but also with our staff, with the managers, anybody that feeds into the risk registers, because that's the bottom-up approach. So there is a new way of monitoring, evaluating and reporting the risk. Substantial progress has been made during this risk reporting cycle. I can honestly tell you, when I first started doing risk registers, the response rate was about 10% of them coming back. We look to about 90 to 95%, if not 100%, on every risk cycle now. And that really shows the engagement that we've actually achieved during this process. So work has already started as well, and I know that Councillor Scobie's already, the Chair's already said that we have the annex risk, which we won't go into this time. We'll save a bit of excitement for the March meeting instead. So as I said, we've started to undertake in reporting to the committee and applying the framework to the highest scoring corporate risks, which is what we'll go on to have a look in a minute. And that's in section 4, and I believe on your documents that might be page 7. And in the future, we're also looking to apply some graphical illustrations and also a risk management journey, so showing you where the risk has come from, where is it, and where do we want it to go to. And that really encompasses this whole new way of dealing with risk management. So if we go down to page 7 and we look at the table of the large corporate risks, and these are the corporate risks that you can see every Governance and Audit Committee, this is what we'll present to you. So each corporate risk is the responsibility of a member of CMT, and they manage the risk mitigation plans with the aim of reducing the likelihood of each risk to a manageable level. So that gives you a risk appetite. What do we actually want to take on? As time moves on, the external environment changes, and this can have an impact on the effectiveness of these mitigations. So we need to be agile. We need to make sure that we move with the risk mitigations as well. And just to remind as well, it's more difficult to take action to reduce the impact of a risk than it is the likelihood. It's easier for us to stop something from happening than rather to make it less worse. So that just gives you a brief overview on our risk management, how we're going to be presenting this going forwards. And if we do look at the scoring mechanism, we will see that most of them are remained the same. And I think that goes to prove, sometimes they do remain relatively high, but we do have a reduction under EPC requirements. So that's pretty much the risk management strategy and the risk management report.
Thank you very much. One comment before we open up to questions from members. Is it possible that we could potentially arrange some training for members around risk management before one of the next meetings? I think that would be quite useful.
I would absolutely love that. That I actually would. Because to have everybody engaged is what risk management's about. If everybody knows what they're doing, that's what it's all about. And this is how we deal with risk from the top downwards and bottom upwards. So yes, I'd love that.
And obviously mandatory for all members. Chris.
I just want to say Amy's enthusiasm for this is genuine, and I think a lot of credit goes to Amy with the sort of risk management is probably up there with treasury management being one of the driest subjects that officers have to come across. But her enthusiasm for it is infectious, and that really has generated that buy-in from officers. If you had someone that was coming at it with a very monotone, it's time to do your risk management, I don't think we'd have the same sort of engagement, so a credit is due to Amy on that. I'm sure she'll make the training very fun and engaging.
I will, I promise.
Councillor Townley.
I'd just like to say, Amy, I'm delighted to see you back in the chamber, and I wish you well for the future.
So I've got a couple of questions on the risk register. Obviously, we are hoping to arrange an extraordinary meeting to talk about the risk of cybersecurity and a potential cyber attack. And we've discussed at last two meetings this issue. I would like to see, when we come back in January, more granularity of detail around these risks, because I think looking at local government sector and looking at the potential risk profile of the council and the fact that we're going through a change, I cannot see how cyber attack can be on the same level as some of those other risks. And it feels like it's about to heighten.
Yeah.
And it feels like I haven't seen the contents of the audit report. I don't know what updates we're going to get. But having worked in cybersecurity for nearly a decade now, looking at the major failings of private businesses that put significant investment into it over a number of years and still have holes, I would imagine an organisation that's gone through the changes that Thanet has in the last 5 years, I would imagine that the security procedures are not where we would hope they would be. I completely accept that the economic environment, the potential impacts of the Environment Act, the changes we're going to have to make to net zero are substantial risks for the council. I would challenge quite hard whether they have the ability to impact services and impact residents of the speed that a cyber attack could.
It's very far-reaching, yeah.
And the bit that I don't have visibility of, which I hope we will get after the extraordinary meeting, is what the mitigations look like. Because to have something scored so high but still be on a par with other risks, the mitigations would have to be very, very good. And I'm getting the sense that they may not be where they want to be. So I don't know what that looks like, but if we are having this discussion in January about cybersecurity, I would like the risk register to be part of that, and I would like to understand some of the mitigations that we're doing, because if they are not there, then my view would be that this committee should be flagging that up to Cabinet, who I'm sure are already aware and working on this, because the potential impact to our residents is too high.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've taken that on board. Thank you.
And the second issue relates to a report we've had earlier and the comments that members have made. If you look at the reports a year ago, one of the top risks was related to governance and decision making. And within 2 meetings, that had dropped from being the top risk to not even being in the key risks. Now, I think we're all agreed we're going in the on the right route. Again, I would be interested whether we have been a little bit too quick to downgrade that risk. I can see that the immediate impact is down, but for it not to be even included on the key risk we're talking about, I understand that it's still in some of those annexes we had. It may be premature, especially because if you had another governance issue now that's layered on what's happened before, I think the cumulative impact of that to the reputation of the council and the questions that would be raised about the decision-making process would still remain high. So even though I would accept that the immediate potential for that risk to be continue to impact on the council, I would question whether it's on that. And actually, from the committee's perspective, I mean, I'm speaking, I'd be interested in members' thoughts. If you drop it down, it sort of goes off the agenda slightly, and a risk like that disrupted the council, that we're now having reports where you've got 3 years of annual reports coming back that have red ratings on them. I just wonder whether that's a little bit premature.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I pass that to you, Chris? Thank
Absolutely. So, yes, very good point in terms of it dropping off and being out of sort of the mind's eye, so to speak, out of sight, out of mind. It would have been on that annex, but for the reasons, obviously, that have been discussed, we're going to streamline the reporting on that. I think there's 2 risks on there from a recollection that were governance related. Firstly, one around political stewardship, because as you said earlier, the amount of change in sort of control and leadership of the council and no overall control situation the council found itself in, that presented a risk itself. I mean, certainly during the last council, there was a period of time where we had sort of 3 council leaders in a very short space of time. We're in a different situation now, and actually even at the tail end of the last council, I think there was a clear demonstration that when there wasn't overall control, there was really good cross-party working relationships. It definitely improved, was my view, over the period of the councils, the last council. The other one, so I think that's legitimate for that to be off. The other one is a fair point as to whether, the immediate impact of the risk that we were facing and dealing with, all the costs associated and the disruption associated with the previous corporate management team, that's been dealt with, but there is clearly still a risk that something could happen like that again in the future. I hope nothing that's comparable to that, because I think it was quite a unique set of circumstances that we had to attend to, but nonetheless, I think is, Ingrid and I were saying earlier when we were speaking some of the items, there's still work to be done to improve some of the governance arrangements at the council, but I don't feel they're at the same magnitude in terms of if you're talking like, if you compare that to a cyber attack, we're talking things that we know we need to improve, but won't necessarily have reputational damage that would see us in the national press, or would have us services, financial costs that are getting towards 7-figure sums. So there could be governance issues. We know we've not cracked it yet, but the impact isn't severe enough, I feel, at the moment, for it to be on that corporate risk register, but it's still very much something that it's on that annex. Even though we're not bringing it to the committee, there's still things that we monitor and we talk about. It will go through our corporate management team. Amy and I will have discussions about it as well. So it is there. I suppose to conclude, we're certainly not resting on our laurels, even if it's not in this report.
Okay, I think that gives me some assurance on that one, that at least we're going to monitor it. And, I don't know if members agree with that. Councillor Garner, come in, please.
Yeah, I do. Maybe at the next full meeting, not extraordinary meeting, that element of the annex could come on the report to committee. I did just want to ask one minor question about the reporting. CEPC requirements has pleasingly gone down from 12 to 4. So I assume that shouldn't be read anymore.
No, that's correct, Councillor Garner, and we leave it on the report just for one cycle so you can see the change, and that will drop off on the next risk report.
Any other comments or questions from members? So this report is down for information, and hopefully when we have the extraordinary meeting, my comments around cybersecurity can be picked up by officers, but are members happy to note the report? Yep. Agreed. Okay, final agenda item, Thanet lottery update. We have, Chris, can you please provide us with your report?
Thank you. Yes, last item to get through, so thank you, councillors, for your patience and contribution so far. Appreciate there's been already some discussion on this item so far in previous papers that we've discussed. So the purpose of bringing this item at this time is the Thanet lottery was audited back in 2022, and it was classified as having no assurance of the audit. There were 14 sort of recommendations at that point in time, and management actions needed to address it. However, when the follow-up was undertaken in February 2023, you can see that only 6 of those had been implemented, and there were still 8 outstanding, which meant that it was still no assurance. So given that we'd gone through that cycle, the committee had asked for a subsequent update, and which said need to leave a little period of time from February to allow for some of those things to be implemented. In terms of, I won't speak to them all, but I'll go through some of the critical and higher recommendations. So the first one you can see in the report is around policies. That has been partially implemented, in that the corporate management team have had sight of revised policies, but they haven't actually been formally adopted yet. So we've got a new policy manager, so that role has been vacant for a little while. They'll be starting with us next month, and this the formal adoption of those policies will be allocated to that officer to implement those and get them promoted and publicised accordingly. So we anticipate that recommendation will be fully implemented by February of next year. The next recommendation, which I think is probably the one of most interest to the committee, is around the allocation of actually the funds that we've built up so far. As it's been referred to earlier, the plan is that the process for bidding to the funds will be amalgamated with the Shared Prosperity Fund bidding process. So again, that is partially implemented because we have a plan, but there are still things that we need to do. I've noted there's been some comments and concerns around member involvement on that panel. Those are noted. My response to that, I appreciate it's not been mentioned on that item, would be I would be very wary of having members on a panel to allocate grants at that level of allocation, because we're talking £1,000 to £5,000, without having a very tight terms of reference in terms of what the role of members were in that, because we're looking to have a scoring criteria in place where there should be less room for subjectivity, which could possibly open the council up to challenge if things would be seen to be allocated on political or other means of allocation. So it's something that can be discussed, but my initial instinct would be to actually follow a framework that is based on a scoring criteria. And that doesn't mean that can't, that will be done behind closed doors. That should still be a very transparent and open process where we can see and determine how those scores have been allocated and the fundings have been awarded. The next one that I'll talk to is the scheme of delegations. This one has been implemented. This has gone through, I can't remember which committee it went to. It might have been Constitutional Review Working Party scheme delegation. One of them, or council, sorry Ingrid, I think it was before your time, so don't know why am I balling you. The final one is training. So there was, this again has been partially implemented I have to put my hand up. I've not completed all the training on this. There's a lot of e-learning. E-learning's not my favourite thing to do, and I've got a long list of Thanet Lotto-related e-learning still to do. The rest are medium recommendations, so I won't talk to those, but I'm happy to take questions on them. So to conclude, of those 8 that were still outstanding in February, we've dealt with 4 of them, so I feel that those 4 can be discharged. Made some progress with the others, but they're only partially implemented, so there's still another 4 outstanding that need to be dealt with.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Manners, but I just want to make a comment myself with that, so Councillor Manners is happy with that. This report, I think, shows why it's important that we keep these things on the agenda, which is something that you and I have discussed at length in the past about these reports. But I remember when I first became chair of G&A and challenging, why there were outstanding recommendations on the lotto, and I think the discussion we had was that it wasn't a priority for the council. Things change, and suddenly, so that's sort of the negative, in a way, that I think we need to make sure that all recommendations, regardless of whether they're a priority or not for us now, should be pushed. The positive is, I think this is a very good report. Members, I know I understand from comments that made before there are some concerns around this. To be clear, this is down for information. We're not a decision maker on this. We are noting the contents of the update from the management response. So, Councillor Manners, please.
Thank you, Will. I'm actually really pleased to see this on the agenda. And I think it shows how far the council has come in the last 2 years, from absolute no hope, no confidence with the Gaming Commission to now we might be on the cusp of having a functioning lottery that might generate some revenue for local community causes. So, that's very, very commendable, and I'm very pleased to see it. I am concerned that, given what's been said this evening about governance and the progress that's been made on that we are mindful to include members. And I do note what Chris is saying with the strictures that relate to political involvement, possible bias, and so on. But then that is the role of the officers to build a framework within which the members can operate, not to actually take over control of every aspect of running something. And I would like to see more participation from members, facilitated, guarded, watched over by the officers who we believe obviously are competent to create the framework for that to happen. I am concerned that the idea of having a point scoring system, which is very dry, and I appreciate that's a very objective way of processing applications, but it's also, you think about where we want this money to go. Take an example, the Scoutmaster, who's probably holding down a job, got a couple of kids at home, runs the Thursday evening Scouts group, probably got a leaky roof and he wants to get his roof fixed, and probably hasn't got time to sit through and wade through a whole process which we know will be convoluted and geared towards people who are able to employ full-time on the payroll bid writers, and we'll end up with another money go round where important community funding ends up in the hands of those who least need it. And that's my concern, and that's why I would like to see member involvement. It just seems to deliver a better result, and also it would seem to be within the aims of this committee to ensure proper governance. Thank you.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I think following through on the point I'd like to make is the fact that the member oversight of this entire process, and we can call it whatever word we want, is utterly vital. We still have 4 outstanding issues. So in terms of, if we tick them off as equivalent issues, we're 50% of the way through the process since February. Last week, at a meeting that members were actively precluded from attending to ensure no transparency, in my opinion, officers of this council have discussed with community groups, representatives and those charged by the parish councils to liaise with them about how they were going to be they were inviting applications and so on. We're nowhere near ready to invite applications for lottery funding and things because, from the sound of it, we're nowhere near launch. We might be in the scale of things, but this is exactly why member involvement is vital, because we have certain officers that I believe are just getting far too carried away with themselves, and they think that, you know, the delegated authority is without. It's like the debacle of bid writing for up to 20,000 from the Shared Prosperity Fund. That's apparently now officers have decided, with no input from the members, that people can apply for up to £20,000, but in order to do that, they have to appoint a bid writer at a cost of £1,500. So they then have to apply for a £1,500 chunk out of the government money that's been provided to help the community in order to fill in a form of their own design. It's just people inventing jobs. You know, Sir Humphrey couldn't make this up. It's an absolute farce, and members must be involved at the core in order to ensure good governance. Because, in fact, I've seen another email from one of the administrators of this programme to an elected member telling them that they would be reviewing how elected members would deal with the members of the public. I don't know who these people think they are. You know, there's constitutional issues here, and the rights of an elected member. We are the bridge to the community. The officers are there to implement policy as agreed by Cabinet and its cascaded delegated bodies. They are there to act within a set of parameters, not to make it up as they go along and to invent money go-rounds that, to be quite frank, I'd ask who the bid writers are that are going to benefit from 1,500 quid on every application. It's absolutely obscene, and I think this council has to take a stance to protect the interests of the public purse, because it's being paid fast and loose here, and to actually announce at a conference and record and invite people to apply for lottery funding when it's quite clear tonight that we are not in a position yet to proceed with it is nothing short than it's exactly why members have to be involved. Otherwise we've got misinformation, and who takes the flak for it? The members and the authority. I'm sorry to be quite so ranty on this, but it's absolutely vital.
I think it's Councillor Davies, you are passionate about this. What I think, before I sort of bring in Councillor Faruqi and Councillor Manis, I just want to dissect some of the challenges there, just to make sure I'm understanding where it fits in with this committee. Because some of the stuff you've mentioned is obviously concerns around a particular officer, and I mean
or officers.
Officers. I don't think it's appropriate at all that this committee has discussion of those. If you have concerns, there is a process to be raised, and I'm sure the monitoring officer can advise of that. I don't know if you want to come in at that point, and just on another couple of related points around member engagement, it's a completely fair comment. Coming from, I was on Kent County Council where members actually gave out grants. I can tell you that process itself was not great either. I think there is no perfect process, and I would have just as much concerns about members distributing funds in their wards to organisations they were chummy with or organisations they'd worked with, actually having a much more independent process from where you had bids coming in and they were evaluated against a criteria, has its merits as well. So, but I recognise there's an opinion there. In terms of the specific point for this committee about the assurances around the Thanet Lotto, I think you are right. There are things outstanding, and I guess the response I would say is, let's make sure, and if Chris Blundell is happy with this, let's make sure we get a follow-up report to the next committee in March, and hopefully we will see that all of those recommendations are closed out. I think that's the appropriate part for this point, for this committee. I apologise. So I'm just going to bring in Ingrid on that point, and then maybe Chris to talk specifically about the next meeting, but thank you.
So just in relation to any concerns that you've got about staffing, obviously it's really important that they're addressed through the proper procedures, which is obviously with the relevant director and or with HR. If there are issues in relation to any kind of standards issues, any code of conduct issues, obviously bring them to my attention. If there's any constitutional impropriety, as I said before, bring that to my attention. So that's what I'd say about concerns in relation to staffing, and it's really, really important that those are addressed, and that's all about improving the council, improving the culture, improving member-officer relations, and I think those things really mustn't be left. So I'd really urge you to do that, and obviously, as I said, bring any issues in relation to constitutional impropriety or but bring them to my attention. I absolutely undertake to look into those. What I'd say in relation to, I don't know the ins and outs of the framework for deciding funding. I've obviously read the report, I've commented on the report, but what I do know is that any system should, and we're bound to, we're bound by the public sector equality duty, and any system needs to consider equalities in terms of a scoring, in terms of the way it's set up and designed. And I note what you say. I don't have a particular view in relation to member involvement or not, but what I do have a view about is that we must be bound by our public sector equality duties, and any process and any system shouldn't be discriminating against any community group or those that are socio-economically more advantaged than others. So that's something that we must make sure that there are measures in place to protect from.
I'm going to bring Chris in, and then I do have Councillor Faruqi, Councillor Manners and Councillor Bright. Chris.
Yes, happy to bring a report back to hopefully conclude that all the recommendations have been discharged at our March committee. What I would say in this instance, we've obviously accepted all the recommendations, but it's not always the case that we would accept all the recommendations that are put to us by internal audit. I would say it is largely the case that we do, but in some instances we will push back because internal audit are making a recommendation around the controls that should be in place to reduce a certain risk, and it might be a decision that we've taken. Do you know what? Actually, we're going to accept that risk, or we're going to we're not going to take that action because this is the consequences that attached to it, not something that are either a very high priority or we can resource it and we're determined it's something we're going to address in another way. In this instance, we've clearly accepted all the recommendations. So through the passage of time, and we'll be aiming for March, report come back, and with a fair wind, it will all be looking fine and dandy.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I think you've heard strong views from a couple of members, so I think we would want to see progress on that. Yeah. Councillor Faruqi.
Thank you very much for the report. I think it says a lot about the transparency of the process, which I think is really appreciated, especially given some of the historical issues that have been mentioned here. I'd like to make a counterpoint, actually, to my councillor colleagues' comments, which are, the very passionate plea for a more devolved, member-led council. I think I have some concerns about, I understand why you're making this plea. I have a feeling that that speech wasn't just for us, but it was for the wider public who may also be paying attention to this. But I do have some concerns that in trying to devolve to a member-led council, you actually risk some of the democratic process which we're actually purporting to correct. One of which is that we are risking perhaps looking at things which are popular rather than and judging things in that way, and being swayed by opinion rather than by making judgments which are fair and equitable, which are actually following a due process. I'm unsure about the evidence that it's a fairer process as well. I know perhaps inductively you feel that it would be so, but I'm unsure if there is any evidence base for that it is a better and more equitable process. And I do worry that you may find that decision-making could fall along party lines, and even, I think that could be an issue in terms of policy and in terms of quick wins when we're actually trying to make appropriate decisions. I apologise for not being terribly eloquent. I've come off a 12-hour shift, but I just wanted to express this counterpoint.
Thank you very much, Councillor Faruqi. I have Councillor Manners.
Thank you for that. Yeah, a couple of points. Why I do believe, when we're looking at process, that member involvement is important here. Community funding from a lottery is increasingly important in bridging the gap between what the council might want to deliver and what's actually possible. And that's obvious. That gap isn't going to reduce in the near future. And obviously we need people out there selling this lottery. You want ambassadors for it who are saying that, you know, you should be a retailer, you should buy these tickets. The money that you might win some money, and you're going to help some good local causes. So I think it is important that we have members who feel part of that process, because at the end of the day, that we've got 50 odd people out there who are going to be spreading the word. I am very concerned, though, that I know what Ingrid has said about having a process that is accessible to everyone. We are in the real world. You know, I wear two hats. One running a community interest company, and I'm not here talking about pitching for funding, but if we wanted to organise, for example, a beach clean over Christmas and give our volunteers a glass of mulled wine on the beach, I need to submit a risk assessment, copy of my public liability insurance, apply for a temporary events notice licence to be able to give away a glass of wine, and if we've got more than 20 beach cleaners, an events licence. And that's the reality of interacting with Thanet District Council as a community group. The burden of administration excludes many smaller groups from actually doing anything, and it will exclude them from applying for funding, which is why I think we do have to look at making sure that funding is accessible, and particularly for smaller grants. It is local councillors who have their eyes and ears to the ground, who are meeting with local community groups. These community groups are very often operating outside of office hours. They, you know, councillors don't go home at 5 o'clock, where they're visiting these groups after hours and seeing what needs to be done. Again, it just comes back to having that basically a democratic accountability with the members, and trusting them to do their jobs properly. And we are grown-ups. The majority of members stood for election not for partisan point scoring. They stood for election because they want to improve things in the local community, irrespective of party affiliation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think there is an important point, and I will come to Councillor Bright, but there is an important point in what you said there around requirements, around insurance and risk assessment, because there are new laws coming into place. Martin's Law, following the horrific events in Manchester, are putting the onus on people organising events or venues that are accessible by the public to actually be responsible for security and safety, because of some of the things that have happened in the past, and actually having those emergency plans in place. So I do not think that, it's always difficult. I get that, but I would say that some of the things maybe you're seeing coming through are not the council doing it because it's just red tape, but the law is going through Parliament at the moment to change some of those things. So apologies. Councillor Bright, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on a couple of the points that have been made, really. I think we do need to be guarded that we are, as councillors, not running the council. We are elected members. We don't get involved in day-to-day operations. However, I would agree with some of what Councillor Manners said, in that we know our communities better than Thanet District Council officers by default. We are the ones that go out there. We are the ones that are working with different community groups in our little pockets of our little towns. And I really think it's important that we are, as members, encouraged to act as that conduit. And I would echo that the burden of administration needs to be minimised. We're not talking about giving £250,000 to these groups. We're talking about giving them 1,500 quid or something. So I think we need to be really careful how we're engaging. And I think it's an opportunity for this council to be more than just a corporate entity. Use the experience that parish councils have got. Parish councils do this stuff every single year and do it really well. They give grants all the time, so use that experience. We know, and we've talked at full council meetings about Thanet District Council engaging more with the town and parish councils to kind of pass on the wisdom and help with training, etc. Give experience to officers at town and parish council level it goes both ways, I think. There are probably things that town and parish councils are doing very, very well. I'm thinking particularly of the large ones like Ramsgate and like Broadstairs that do very, very well with community groups. That actually nascent community projects at Thanet level could probably tap into. So I think we need to just be really, really mindful that we've got a lot of people in the room right now that are very engaged with the community, do want to get involved, albeit not from an operational point. So just, I think we should just be very, very mindful of that.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Davison and Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify something. I got very confused by Councillor Faruqi's position because she started talking about partisan things. This committee is non-partisan and is about governance and things, and I just want to be quite clear that nothing that has been said from this side tonight is in any way party affiliated or indeed playing to the crowd, as she intimated. So
I think the point, and it's the point that I made as well, which is if you move to a funding model where councillors are involved in, like as Kent County Council has, money will go into groups associated with that councillor, and funding potentially could go to the political party. And I think that is a very real point, and I think there is a lot of evidence out there about it. So the point that we both made was to say that it's not a case that members good, officers bad. There are balances on both sides.
no, I was referring to the comment about tonight's position rather than that. But no, that's why it's so important, I think, that we have as broad transparency as possible, members and officers working together, and that way you cover each other, rather than this behind closed door cabal mentality.
It's a fair point. You wanted to come in quickly?
Yeah, very good. It's probably just, this may all be aware, but it's probably not that clear in the report, that this is the element of the Thanet Lotto that when someone buys a ticket, they haven't already identified a good cause. So good causes can already sign up to the lottery and say, I'd like to register as a good cause for the lottery. We have a set of criteria. If they meet it, which I'd say 99 times out of 100, they do, and they're added to it. They're not extremely prohibitive. Then when someone buys a ticket, they are able to say, I want to support X Scout group or Y charity, and the majority of the money goes to them. If someone buys a ticket and they don't nominate a set cause, that goes into this pot that the council has to allocate. So it's not that there isn't already a process in place where good causes are registered and they can't promote themselves, because they still have the ability to do that. This is for the element of the lottery fund where a purchaser of the ticket has not decided which good cause they want their ticket money to go towards.
Councillor Wright, apologies for bumping you there.
I'm glad you left it alone. I'm going to give you an example. As most of you know, that I'm also a Kent County Councillor, and I have a pot. And I think there is a gentleman sitting in front of me called Mr. Donaldson who will say that I've had no problem in being partisan. I'm holding an amount of grant money for a project if he can get it off the ground. And it does work. I'd like to think that over the last couple of years, any money that I've given out, how big or small, have gone to people who really need it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. Councillor Townley.
Thank you. To go further from Councillor Bright and Manners and Davis, I can't see the reason why there's any objection to have members involved, because all it'll do is to increase the actual understanding of that distribution of the money. Of course, we all want to have our own wards to receive money, but I think we've got to be fair and say that there is a responsibility upon ourselves to do the correct and proper thing. And I think you officers must understand that we are the people who actually go out into the community, find out what they need, and we put their case forward. Whether we are successful in obtaining that money or not is neither here nor there, but at least we have an answer to the public to say, we tried. And if we don't try, and we're not part of that makeup, then I think, we're the ones who are going to be criticized. The officers never get criticized because they are not in the public domain. So I believe that that we should have a representation in that decision making. And I think you ought to trust us as members. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, Councillor Bright to ask a question.
Yeah, it's just a really specific one. This fund is available to groups from across Thanet, or is it only in specific areas?
No, across the whole
Okay,
district.
thank you.
So members, this was the most debated item and it is down for information. So are we happy to note the report? Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the meeting. I bet you're all very glad that we don't have another hour's worth of cybersecurity chat right now. We'll save that for after the new year. Have a good Christmas, everybody, and we will see you at the next Governance Audit meeting in the new year.